Our first reading this morning comes from The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This novel, the first in the Broken Earth series, won the Hugo Award in 2016. Jemisin is acclaimed for her world building in her science fantasy novels. This particular book and the series takes place in an alternate version of Earth, or perhaps in the Earth of the future. In this world, there are beings called origins, sort of extra human beings that can manipulate the Earth with their powers. There are other more than human entities as well. And all the beings of this Earth follow something called stone lore, wisdom that has been retained on tablets that teaches them how to survive what's called the fifth season, which is a season that comes once in a while to ravage the earth in a momentary apocalypse so that it might reform again. Our reading this morning goes, according to legend, Father Earth did not originally hate life. In fact, as the lorists tell it, once upon a time, Earth did everything he could to facilitate the strange emergence of life on his surface. He crafted even, predictable seasons, kept changes of wind and wave and temperature slow enough that every living being could adapt, evolve. Summoned waters that purified themselves, skies that always cleared after a storm. He did not create life, that was happenstance, but he was pleased and fascinated by it and proud to nurture such strange, wild beauty upon his surface. Then people began to do horrible things to Father Earth. They poisoned waters beyond even his ability to cleanse and killed much of the other life that lived on his surface. They drilled through the crust of his skin, past the blood of his mantle, to get at the sweet marrow of his bones. And at the height of human hubris and might, it was the origins who did something that even Earth could not forgive. They destroyed his only child. No lorist that Cyanite has ever talked to knows what this cryptic phrase means. It isn't stone lore, just oral tradition, occasionally recorded on ephemerals like paper and hide, and too many seasons have changed it. Sometimes it's the Earth's favorite glass knife that the origins destroyed. Sometimes it's his shadow. Sometimes it's his most valued breeder. Whatever the words mean, the lorists and mests agree on what happened after the origins committed their great sin. Father Earth's surface cracked like an eggshell. Nearly every living thing died as his fury became manifest in the first and most terrible of the fifth seasons, the shattering season. Powerful as they were, those ancient people had no warning, no time to build store caches, no stone lore to guide them. It is only through sheer luck that enough of humankind survived to replenish itself afterward, and never again has life attained the heights of power that it once held. Earth's recurrent fury will never allow that. Some say Earth is angry because he wants no company. I say the Earth is angry because he lives alone.
Our second reading comes from an interview with Joanna Macy in Yes magazine from the year 2000. She writes, "What is the sacred? It's the ground of our being. It's the whole of which we are part. It's what imbues our life with meaning and beauty. Of course, there are different ways of perceiving our relation to it. Mainstream Western society has, by and large, related to the sacred by projecting it outwards, setting it apart as a God out there to worship and obey. We made the sacred transcendent and in its honor created ziggurats, cathedrals, masterpieces of art and choral music, perhaps our greatest cultural achievements. But after several millennia of assigning the sacred to a transcendent dimension removed from ordinary life, the world around us begins to go dead and loses its luminosity and meaning. The earth is reduced to a supply store of material resources and a sewer for our wastes. And in such a world devoid of the sacred, anything goes. Buy up, sell off, consume as much as you can. What's so beautiful about being alive at this moment is that the pendulum is starting to swing the other way. We are retrieving the projection. We are taking the sacred back into our lives. The swing is from transcendence to immanence. We are reawakening to the sacredness of life itself in the soil and air and water, in our brothers and sisters of other species, and in our own bodies. To see all life as holy rescues us from loneliness and the sense of futility that comes with isolation. The sacred becomes part of this encounter, part of you sitting in front of me, present in that stand of bamboo, and even in myself. I don't have to go to Chartres Cathedral to be in the presence of the divine. It's right here. This means that our sorrow is sacred too. Within us all is grief for what is happening to our world, the despoiling of earth, the extinction of our brother-sister species, the massive suffering of our fellow humans. But when we feel isolated, we stifle that sorrow and rage in order to fit in better and to avoid aggravating the loneliness. Experiencing the sacred as immanent helps people to befriend their pain for the world and not fear that it will further isolate them. This is a matter of practical urgency because to repress and discount the grief and dread we feel on behalf of all beings locks us into the status quo. In the work I do with groups, we reframe our pain for the world, recognizing it as the capacity to suffer with, which is the literal meaning of compassion. It is not only honored in all spiritual traditions, it also serves as wholesome feedback necessary to our survival. To recognize this brings us back to life. It's okay for me to be here. It's okay for me to hurt, even. It's okay for me to weep for people who aren't even born yet. That's because I belong. That's because I am part of the sacred living body of Earth through all time. This sense of belonging is spreading with the new story of our universe that Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, Sister Miriam McGillis of Genesis Farm in New Jersey, and others are bringing in now. Drawing from the latest discoveries of science, they show how each of us is an inseparable part of this ever unfolding story since it first began in the primal, quote, flaring forth. Moreover, people are expressing this sense of belonging by stepping forth. When you act on behalf of something greater than yourself, you begin to feel it acting through you with a power that is greater than your own. The religious term for this empowerment is grace, and we conceived of it as coming from God. Now we are feeling graced by other beings and by Earth itself. those with whom and on whose behalf we act, give us strength and eloquence and staying power we didn't know we had. We just need to practice knowing and remembering that we are sustained by each other in the web of life. Such practice helps us to decondition ourselves from centuries of old paradigm thinking, which we've used in ways that have made us so lonely and selfish and nuts and powerless. It all goes together. Greed and powerlessness go together. So we practice knowing our true power, which comes as a gift like grace, because in truth it is sustained by others. We can draw on the wisdom and beauty and strength of our fellow humans and our fellow species like so much money in the bank. I find that incredibly empowering because it means I can go into a situation and trust that the courage and intelligence required will be supplied.
N.K. Jemisin, the author of the fifth season, weaves a tale of an Earth that might yet be, or perhaps an alternate Earth, one that undergoes, as the reading indicated, a fifth season once in a while, every couple of centuries. The fifth season is a season of destruction, of apocalyptic change, of world ending and renewing. The trilogy tracks one of these fifth seasons and the protagonists who are trying to end fifth seasons once and for all. I don't want to give any spoilers, so we're not going to dig too deep into the details of the plot line. But what we need to understand is that in the lore of these books, in the wisdom texts of the society we learn about, Father Earth has a will, has an ability to crack himself open, bring destruction to his own surface in order to keep the humans in check, and to heal himself in ways he can't when the humans place themselves too highly above all else. This particular aspect, the idea of Earth as father, struck me. So often we refer to the Earth as mother and think of the Earth as nurturing, providing sustenance and comfort. All those virtues we lift up on Mother's Day, we also associate with Mother Earth. The Greeks did this. They called her Gaia. Terra is what the Romans called her. Mother Nature, we sometimes say. And implied in our use of those female terms is a sort of martyrdom. The Earth as mother should sacrifice herself to us, to our use and our future, regardless of her needs and desires. Because too often, historically, that's been the vision of ideal motherhood, womanhood. Of course, we know better. We know that healthy mothering involves boundaries, strength, resilience, self-protection, perseverance in the face of great odds. Jemisin is making a conscious choice here by queering our notion of Earth. In stone lore, Father Earth, who was once filled with delight at humans and at existence, now is filled with anger. Earth as father can be violent, can be self-protective, can have righteous anger because of the destruction he's experiencing. It's something we don't traditionally allow for Mother Earth. This is just one of the ways that Jemisin's work comments on our world. The trilogy truly speaks straight to the heart of our current moment as humans on this earth. And this is the trick of fantasy and sci-fi that makes it so vital and ripe for spiritual exegesis, even as the stories are placed in some world that is not our own. They cut to the reality of our lives and choices and future. Joanna Macy, the writer, Buddhist scholar, and environmental theologian, has written extensively about our planet, our relationship to it as humans, and this particular moment in which we find ourselves. Macy writes of Gaia using that ancient Greek feminine gender term for this planet. In a poetic and gripping piece titled Our Life as Gaia, Macy writes, "Let's go back, far beyond our conception in this body, back to the first splitting and spinning of the stars. As scientists measure now, it is 15 billion years ago we manifested in what they call the Big Bang. There we were, careening out through space and time, creating space and time. Slowly, with the speed of light, in vast curls of flame and darkness, we reached for form. We were then great swirls of clouds, gas, and dancing particles. Can you imagine you remember? And the particles, as they circled in the dance, desired each other and formed atoms. It is the same desire for form that beats now in this drum and in our hearts. 10 billion years later, one of the most beautiful swirls of that swirling mass split off from its blazing sun, the sun we feel now on our faces, and became the form we know best. And our lifetime as Gaia began." Macy understands the Earth, this Gaia, as an entity with a long, long history and a sort of consciousness of its own. Gaia, she notes, is 5 billion years old and lives in a universe that is 15 billion years old. She stresses the almost unknowability of this vastness by inviting us into a thought exercise, one perhaps that you have encountered before. If we map the history of Earth, Gaia, onto 24 hours, our existence as humans begins at 1 second to midnight. A tiny, tiny speck of time in the long narrative of Gaia and in the evolution of life. Gaia is so much more than us, will always be more than us, even if we continue toward an apocalypse. If we humans disappear, the Earth itself will not die, not yet, and something new will arise. In some ways, if a climate change apocalypse occurs, we might view it exactly as the kind of fifth season that N.K. Jemisin writes about. Gaia's work to heal itself by ridding itself of those pesky humans, or at least cutting them down a peg or two. Perhaps we will survive if we have wisdom enough. But Macy doesn't actually have that kind of fatalism that Jemisin Stonelore has. Macy believes that we are in a moment full of potential. She asks that we consider the span of humanity as 24 hours. If we do that, Jesus enters the scene at 6 seconds to midnight. And, quote, "What now shapes our world, our industrial society with its bombs and bulldozers, has taken place in the last few microseconds of the day we have known as humans." These microseconds we find ourselves in, Macy notes, contain within them even smaller increments of time. This moment, this brink of time, as she calls it, in which we know that we are killing the earth and that terrible things might come to pass. But she has another less depressing and apocalyptic name for what has begun to happen in the last half century or so. The Great Turning, she calls it. The Great Turning is the revolution Macy believes we are in, and we're in it part by necessity, because the life we have built of industry and progress and rape of the earth is unsustainable. The Industrial Revolution took us along a path, one that has led to what she calls an industrial growth society, focused on production, consumption, a notion of progress built on capitalism, accumulation of power and of objects. The problem, Macy notes, is that the industrial growth society is predicated on an infinite system, infinite resources allowing for infinite growth, when in fact, the earth, Gaia, is possessed in many ways of finite resources. And when we have bled Gaia to the bone, there'll be nothing left. What's called for then is this revolution that Macy optimistically thinks we are in, this great turning. It's what she believes will save us. And that great turning has three aspects. The first is actions, changes, behaviors that will slow the tide of Gaia's destruction. The point of this is just to give us more time to figure out what to do. And it would help to save some of what we have left, species, resources, and so on. This is the part about staunching the bleeding. Nonviolent protests, boycotts, any means of stopping the inexorable march of capitalist doom. The second dimension is legitimately altering our systems into the future, creating alliances between different groups, recreating our economy, exploring new ways, or perhaps recovering old ways of living on and with this earth. Cooperative groups, shared urban farms, altered sources of energy, sustainable practices, and so much more. The experiments into these that we already see happening will be important to teach us that all those alternate ways of living are possible, that the industrial growth society can die and something new can be born. The final dimension of the Great Turning, though, is what Macy calls a shift in consciousness, an actual change in our values and our self-understanding, a new way of seeing ourselves in the world. Our reading this morning explored just that, the question of the earth's holiness and the immanence of the divine in Gaia itself. This, Macy writes, is, quote, a spiritual revolution, awakening perceptions and values that are both very new and very ancient, linking back to rivers of ancestral wisdom. This is necessary because a new system, unsupported by new values, will, to quote Macy, shrivel and die. We might stem the tide, we might explore changes, but without a radical shift to our relationship with Earth, to each other, and to ourselves, we won't actually make lasting change. In that same interview in Yes Magazine, Macy also declares that, quote, things will get a lot harder and scarier for a while. And when we get scared, we get mean. We turn on each other. She worries that, quote, our greatest danger is fear and the blaming and scapegoating that fear arouses. I think about that a lot, about the state of the world and the notion of seasons, not seasons within the year, but large meta seasons of existence, the ages of humanity, and the one that we're in now. Is it a fifth season, a la Jemisin, a time for destruction that hopefully engenders regeneration? Or is it a time of fear and challenge that precedes a great turning that prevents a fifth season? In many ways, and often, I am reminded that our world has improved, at least in the aggregate. People on average across the globe are more safe, more assured of life, food, and so on. And I'm taking care here to say on average or in the aggregate, because in plenty of places across this earth, lives are threatened by food scarcity, civil war, violence based in prejudice, disease. The situation in India right now is a horrific humanitarian crisis. And to say that life is better would be to deny the truth of how so many of our human siblings live and die. So we have to be careful to say that improvements have been disproportionately doled out. Even within what we might call general aggregated improvement, we do indeed live in a time of continued challenge. Decades ago, Martin Luther King Jr. said that he feared our technology had outstripped our humanity. We live in a time when globalization has outpaced our human ability to adapt to it. In the world of the stone lore, Father Earth only let evolution progress at a pace humans could accommodate to. But once humans take over the evolving, force the hand of the earth, its creatures, and all that is made on this globe, we outpace our own ability to adapt. Technology, beginning with the Industrial Revolution and continuing through the creation of atomic weaponry and other means of mass violence, and then into vast networks of interconnection has brought us to this brink without a corollary shift in understanding deeply and universally and well our interconnectedness. Right alongside that are economic systems that exploit and commodify human beings, again, without any shifting understanding of their personhood, their worth and dignity, their value beyond being machines for use or products for sale. We have eschewed religion, often rightly, as overbearing and dogmatic as a means of control or denial of whole selfhood. But we've done nothing to supply in its stead a system for meaning making. We've lost our awareness that meaning making is fundamental to human living. That to feel whole and complete, most humans need community of some kind and some means of understanding their world. And so we have left a vacuum that's being filled by propaganda and conspiracy theories, empty promises of community here and in the hereafter. Our collective inability to engage deeply in a true universalist approach to existence that understands the complex needs and capacities of human beings is clear all around us. It is everywhere apparent. Part of the work of the industrial growth society was to dissociate human beings from the divine, to make us forget where to find it in Gaia and others and in ourselves. And the end result is a large chunk of humanity living disconnected from what makes them human. And that kind of disconnection, dissociation, indeed brings fear, confusion, emptiness that longs to be filled, oppression projected outward, and violence against all that sustains life. And so a vital part of the Great Turning is that consciousness shift that involves learning to see each other as holy. It's reconnecting not only to the immanence of the sacred that is Gaia, but also the immanence of the holy that is us as a part of Gaia, us as belonging to the movements of the earth and the history of being. If we could recapture that immanence, we could remember too that all life is holy, which by the way is a very universalist position, one we explored a bit last week as well. And if we could remember that all life, not just human, is holy, then we would treat each other not with fear or blame or suspicion, but as holy siblings, part of the great being of existence. Then we would treat this earth that we share in, this parent earth of ours, as also worthy of our care and consideration. If we could hold each other and the ground of our existence in this way, then we might actually be able to internalize the very clear and present danger that is this season, this age, this moment at the brink of time in which we are lost, separated from love, from God, from humanity, from our parent earth. Our fear pushes that knowledge away. I understand this, as I know you do. To actually accept that this is the situation we are in is challenging. To accept it will maybe ask too much of us. But only once we can truly integrate this truth and radically shift our world, only once we can do that can we change anything. I lament sometimes, as many do, that there is no hope for us. I worry that we will yet become the humans of Jemisin's work, once dominant and powerful beyond our ability to control, taken down by our parent Earth in an apocalyptic destruction of this planet that perhaps, if we have any shred of wisdom and luck, creates a regeneration of humans or something else in our place. I worry over this, and I find it hard to embrace that grief and fear and pain. But Macy says we must embrace the true possibility that our existence might end. We have to accept the true possibility that our disconnection and dissociation have been so complete, that humanity has been so severed, that without radical change, we're doomed. We have to be able to read the reality in the prophecy of fantasy. Sci-fi and fantasy writers are, we can say, the prophets of our age. And we have to be willing to read the reality and prophetic fantasy. And then, because fundamentally we believe in hope and redemption and the healing power of community and connection, we have to choose a different path. The radical path of deepening, of care, of nurturing, of wholeness, of good boundaries and equality and peacefulness, all the best of parental virtues. Our reading contained that short couplet of wisdom from within the world of the story. Some say the earth is angry because he wants no company. I say the earth is angry because he lives alone. We have to choose actively our inherited universalist path of wide and radical love that is immanent in this world, grounded in this earth, that delights in our presence when we remember the truth of our relationship. We have to choose that love, found everywhere, from the dark matter we can't quite grasp to the rocks and trees and waters and creatures we see and feel, to the stars beyond our knowing that we long to one day visit. We have to actively choose to embody and embrace and let in the love that is found deep within and among us as human beings. We have to stop living alone and start living in love. We have to come home. Sometimes I wrap up sermons by suggesting actions for us to take, personal actions or collective ones, advocacy or charity. But honestly, today, I just want to ask you to begin your journey to the great turning by reading. Read Jemisin's work. Open your mind and heart and body to the pain and joy of prophetic fiction and let it change you. Let it bring you back to yourself and to Gaia and to all being. May the great turning come to pass. May we come back into our own beings. May we rebuild connections and community, and may we come home at last in love. So may it be.